Chapter 66. The second thruster burn had ended, but it didn't mean they were safe. The creatures had dropped back, but they were still coming. Every few minutes, Callie flipped to the aft cam feeds and watched the trailing horde. The sheer size of the lifeform conglomeration was daunting, to say the least. It looked as though there were millions of them, far from the number they'd seen on the hull when they'd first arrived, let alone what they'd found inside Mira. Her ribs throbbed. That wasn't going to change anytime soon. While she'd probably be more comfortable in sickbay, slacking with Elliot, the pain wasn't going anywhere. Her broken ribs, bruised organs, and tortured flesh didn't care if she was in a combat suit or a damned bathtub. It would still hurt. In a few more minutes, Oakes would warn them about the next burn, and it would be time to get back in the acceleration couch. But until that happened, she was going to keep looking at the cam footage from Talby and Gunny. The closer Gunny's skiff got to the beacon, the stranger the light became. The captured images also started to waver in and out of focus, as though the onboard AI was unable to figure out what to track. Worst of all, many of the frames were simply not there. The cams had somehow dropped at least 7 or 8 seconds worth of footage scattered amidst grainy, unclear images of dangling pipe, crumbling Atmos steel, and shattered bulkheads. The beacon and the surrounding area seemed to just consume the skiff's light, as if the photons were liquid going down a drain. What they'd seen inside Mira, hell, even in the hangar bay, had been the same. Something was eating the light, making it far more dim than it should be. Worse, while the light was bright up close, the darkness seemed to just swallow it. Did the beacon provide some sort of field inside the ship? Was it the creatures? Or was it something else causing the effect? She shivered. Knowing probably wouldn't set her mind at ease anyway. They were towing the sled that held the beacon. They were being followed by an unimaginable horde of malevolent alien life, and somewhere ahead of them, Dickerson and his escape pod were still traveling to Pluto. The only question was whether or not he was still alive inside of it. Talby appeared at the cargo bay entrance. She snapped to, but he shouted at ease before she had a chance. He looked in her direction, held up a finger, and beckoned her. Kelly felt guilty, although she didn't know why. She supposed she felt that way whenever a superior, NCO or commissioned, wanted to have a word. Didn't matter if it was Gunny, one of the many lieutenants, or the captain himself. It was always the same crawling feeling that she had done something wrong and would be held accountable for it. She briskly walked to him and took a parade rest stance in front of him. "Sir?" He looked as though he were going to give her bad news. "Corporal, Gunny is out of action. Until he is returned to duty, you'll be performing his tasks." The words entered her ears and her mind froze. Part of her had known this was going to happen. The moment she'd heard Gunny was down, she knew Talby would have to juggle things around. To make matters worse, 2 members of her squad, including herself, had already suffered extensive injuries. But someone had to be in command, and by rank, she was next in line. Somehow, she had a feeling that needn't have mattered. Carb had seen plenty of action during the last 2 wars. She had much more experience than Callie, and she'd even been a corporal before she was busted down. But something in the way Talby looked, grim and cheered at the same time, made her feel as though she'd proven herself. "Aye, sir," she said at last, doing her best to keep the words flat and emotionless. She thought she had succeeded. Talby nodded to her. "Black has put you on the command channel. For all field ops, I'm your direct superior. Understood?" "Aye, sir," she said again. "Good." He brushed a hand through his close-cropped hair. "How are the injuries?" "Not keeping me from doing my job, sir." He nodded. "I don't know how you did it, Kelly Mora. I don't know how any of you got out of there alive." He raised his hand in salute. She clicked her heels together and returned it. Talby slowly lowered his hand. "I want your squad on their asses and in their couches in 2 minutes." "Aye, sir," she said, cheeks flushed, voice choked. "See you after the burn." He turned and quickly made his way back to the bridge. Kelly watched him go for a moment, more to compose herself than out of reverie. She didn't deserve the baton, not yet, but it had been passed on to her. She was in charge of their only squad. 2 relatively healthy lance corporals, 1 in sickbay, 1 floating out in space, and 2 privates. She grunted. "Don't get all choked up," she said to herself. "You were leading 3 lance corporals through that hell ship not more than 2 hours ago. This would be easy by comparison." She took in a deep breath before turning around. Noble was still at his place in the very back, his eyes closed and fully jacked in with black. Carb stood with Murdoch and Went, Copenhaver standing astride the SV-52. "Black Company!" she bellowed in a hoarse shout she didn't even know she could make. "Form up!" The 4 Marines snapped to attention, arms at their sides, eyes staring straight ahead. "Time to ride the G's! Get settled in your couches! You have 1 minute! Move it!" The 4 Marines walked in pairs out of the cargo bay. Callie peeled herself off the acceleration couch. The last burn felt short to her. She checked her chronometer, and she was right. 4 minutes short. She wasn't really sure what that meant. "Well, Corporal," Went said, "I haven't really had the chance to say welcome back." She smiled. "We've all been a little busy," she said. "How are you holding up?" "Doing fine." He jerked a thumb at Murdoch, busy keeping his sorry ass alive. "Hey!" Murdoch said. Went shrugged. "Sounds about right, doesn't it?" Murdoch raised a finger to protest, paused, and slowly lowered it. He fetched a deep sigh. "No comment." Kelly laughed. "Let's hope you don't need to—"
"Command crew to the briefing room,"
Talby's voice said over the general comms. Went stared up at the speaker hidden somewhere in the overhead. "Ah," he said. He slowly lowered his eyes to meet hers, his face set in a grin. "The joys of command." "Shut up. You kids behave." Kelly made her way from the crew area to the bridge level. She should have felt nervous. Hell, her heart should be jackhammering away in her chest, and her stomach clenched in knots. But instead, she felt nothing. It was just another task in the seemingly longest day of her life. Once she made it to the briefing room, she knocked on the door. "Enter and at ease," Dunn's voice said through the door's speaker. She opened the door, closed it behind, and walked to the table. Without breaking his stare with the hologram, he gestured for her to take a seat. "Welcome, Corporal." "Thank you, sir," she said. Talby glanced at her and nodded to the place next to him. She took the hint and walked past him. Noble grinned at her, but said nothing. "We cut the burn short because of a transmission we received from Mickey." 3 circles appeared on the holographic map. The triangle in the center was S&R Black. 2 of the circles were behind the ship, the 3rd in front. He pointed at the map. "Those 2 in our wake are separate walls of the creatures. They're still on our tail, although we've gained quite a lot of ground." Dunn flicked his eyes to the pulsing circle far in front of them. "That is Dickerson's escape pod." Callie nearly asked a question and bit her lip instead. Fortunately, Talby did it for her. "Sir, does Mickey have any intel on the pod? Life signs? Power?" Dunn glanced at him. "Yes and no. Its thrusters are continuing to fire on schedule, so it obviously still has both fuel and power. As to life signs, your guess is as good as anyone's." Talby nodded. "So the bad guys are still coming at us, and we're going to have to stop accelerating to capture the escape pod." "That's the long and the short of it, yes," Dunn said. He made eye contact with Noble. "How are we on fuel?" "Fine for now, sir," Noble said. "Reactors are doing okay. As long as we continue this short burst thrusts, I don't foresee any issues." "Good," Dunn said. "Talby, how do you want to do this?" "I think we keep braking to match Dickerson's speed," Talby said. "After we catch up with him, I'll take the SV-52 and retrieve him. Shouldn't take long. Once we're underway again, we can launch the sled." Launch the sled. The sled. Yes, they still had to launch the sled. They had to get it flying to Pluto, regardless of what else they did. In that respect, wasn't Dickerson secondary? No, she thought, he's not. But in the scope of the mission, he is. She swallowed hard. Dunn nodded to himself. "Corporal?" She stiffened. She hadn't exactly expected him to ask her anything. "Aye, sir?" You have anything to add? She felt as though he could see every thought inside her head.
May I ask a question, sir?
Dunn blinked. Of course you may. She swung her head to look at Noble.
Lieutenant, do we have to fire the sled straight at Pluto, or can we send it on a different trajectory?
Noble absently scratched at the wrap around his ribs as he considered the question. A few seconds later, he began to grin. Yes, Corporal, we have enough control to program a different flight path, at least to a certain degree. She looked back at the captain.
Sir, if we send the sled off on a wider flight path, we can ensure the creatures will give up chasing us and go after the sled. That will leave us more space and time to retrieve Dickerson.
Dunn pursed his lips and returned his stare to the hologram. She thought he was going to tell her she was being silly, but smiled instead. Black, calculate potential paths for the sled.
Yes, Captain.
A series of arcs appeared, each beginning at S&R Black's position and ending at Pluto. Black then erased the arcs that would put Dickerson in obvious danger. The remaining 3 courses took the sled on approaches that would bring the sled in on Pluto's far side. The sled would peel off from their present position, execute multiple attitude burns to gain lateral space, and even more attitude burns once it closed on Pluto. Which of these 3 is the optimum? Dunn asked. The arc in the middle of the 3 possibles pulsed.
This one,
Black said,
shows the least probability of failure. The widest arc is the safest. However, it is also the most likely to fail due to the sled's limited fuel supply.
What's the probability of success on the optimum arc? Talby asked.
85%,
Black said.
That estimate, of course, does not include the very slim chance of the creatures catching up with the sled.
Void wept, Noble muttered. Kelly understood what he meant. If the creatures caught up with the sled, there was no telling what they would do, or, more importantly, what the beacon would do. They would certainly lose any chance of controlling the vehicle, let alone where it landed, or if it landed. This arc doesn't really buy us too much distance, Talby said. He glanced at Mira. But it should give us enough. Let's be clear about this, Dunn said. We're talking about delaying a rescue, essentially leaving Dickerson in his pod longer than we have to, in order to guarantee we can actually save him. Kelly nodded.
I think so, sir.
Dunn's smile grew. Talby? Aye, sir, I think we should go with this. Any objections? Dunn asked Noble. The engineer slowly shook his head. I think the sled can handle it. Just means Black and I will have to keep a closer eye on it. I think we're good. Black?
Yes, Captain.
Find us the best launch point on our way to pick up Dickerson, sooner rather than later.
Yes, Captain,
Black said. She paused for a moment.
The best launch window will open in 15 minutes.
Good. Talby, I want a plan of attack for the sled in my block in 5 minutes. Aye, sir. Let's get this right, people. Dismissed. Kelly raised her hand to salute, but stopped short. None of the officers did, so she felt confused. Dunn looked at her with a knowing smile. Salutes, Corporal, are a protocol we don't observe with the command crew, not while on a mission.
Oh, she said dumbly. Of course, sir.
Talby beckoned her. Let's get to the cargo bay, Mira. We have some work to do. Block to block was the most efficient way to manufacture and disseminate tactical plans. While walking to the cargo bay from the briefing room, she and Talby had an entire conversation regarding loadouts, assignments, and tactics. By the time the two reached the bay, Talby had already transmitted the plans to Dunn's block. The captain sent an acknowledgement to both of them in return. It was a go. Kelly had already sent block messages commanding her squad to be in the cargo bay and ready to go. As she and Talby stepped into the cargo bay, the 4 Marines stood at parade rest, still dressed in their combat suits. "Officer on deck!" Kelly yelled. The 4 Marines stiffened, eyes straight ahead. Talby chuckled. "At ease," he said. He glanced at Kelly. "Your show, Corporal."
"Aye, sir."
She walked forward a few paces and glanced at each of her charges.
"Slight change in plans, Marines. We're going to launch the sled before we go after Dickerson." Before the 4 nom-rates had a chance to ask questions or protest, she continued speaking. Went, you, Murdoch, and Carb are my squad. Copenhaver, you're with the LT. So what's the plan? Carb asked. Kelly grinned. We will do a bounce and tether maneuver to the back of the ship and the sled. The SV-52 will provide cover fire and emergency ops if necessary. Went, who's a better shot, you or Murdoch? Went scoffed. It was the only answer Kelly needed. Murdoch looked hurt, but didn't protest. Carb, you and Murdoch will handle the sled. Went and I will provide cover fire as well as handle the emergency tether lines. She nodded at Carb. You have any objections? No, Corporal, Carb said. I'll keep the little tyke safe. Hey, Murdoch said. Talby turned slightly to hide a grin. Kelly fought to keep her face stony. It was damn difficult. So get yourselves ready. Went, you and I are carrying as much tritium as we can. Full mags. Fuck the other stuff. Aye, Corporal. Carb, Murdoch, same load, but don't plan on using your rifles unless it's absolutely necessary. The last thing we need is for one of you to accidentally hit the sled or the beacon. Murdoch raised a hand. Corporal? What is it, Private? He swallowed hard. What do we do if the beacon goes off again? She traded an uneasy glance with Talby. We do whatever we have to do to succeed, she said. Any other questions? Murdoch shook his head. The young private's face had drained of color. He looked more terrified than she'd ever seen him. Let me be clear, Kelly said. We fuck this up, we lose Dickerson. We fuck this up, we might lose Black. If we really fuck this up, we might lose Sol System altogether. The cargo bay went dead silent. She checked her chronometer. We have 10 minutes before the ship reaches the launch window. We have 2 minutes after that to get the sled launched. We're in space in 2 minutes. Make it happen, people. Get to it. The strained silence instantly disappeared. Copenhaver trotted to the SV-52, removed the fueling cables, and began a pre-flight check. Talby joined her, obviously pleased by her initiative. Kelly grabbed her helmet and a rifle from the rack. She stashed several magazines in her pouch and checked the ammo count in the rifle. When they finished loading up, the last of the tritium mags were exhausted. Her 4 Marines, plus Talby and Copenhaver's weapons, were flush with the tritium ammo. Once they ran out, they were done. They'd be down to regular explosive flechettes and shock rounds. Kelly stood next to Carb. You really okay with this? She asked in a low voice. Carb nodded. I don't like how long we're going to make Dickerson wait. She traded a glance with Kelly. If you say it's for a good reason, though, that's good enough for me. It is, Kelly said. This will buy us more time. Hopefully it will make picking him up even easier. Carb made a noise that might have been a mirthless laugh or a curse. Easy? On this mission? That would be a first. Keep an eye on Murdoch. He's looking a little squirrely. Hi, boss. Carb patted her pouch, her gloved fingers counting the stashed magazines. I'll keep him out of trouble. Just keep him from freezing, Kelly said. Will do, boss. Went, Kelly called. You ready or what? Aye, boss. The large Marine had already locked his rifle to his back and was checking Murdoch's suit and load. Ready when you are. Outstanding, Kelly said. We'll go out the personnel airlock. Make sure you're tethered. We'll mag walk along the starboard hull until we reach aft. Once we get there, Wint and I will take up position to provide cover fire, tether support, and assistance if needed. Carb, you and Murdoch will follow the tow lines down to the sled. Release it and follow Black's instructions as far as its orientation. Once that happens, we'll pull you back. Understood? The 3 Marines bellowed affirmatives. Kelly smiled. Let's do it.